Think about that. That was the reaction of the federal government to somebody handing over the most powerful and influential cartel head in Mexican history to the United States, was to accuse him of treason. So I think that should tell you everything you need to know about the current federal government, and also about its possible reaction to an actual direct action mission in Mexico. There will be a lot of indignation. There will be a lot of noise and sound, but I don't think they can do anything about it. I mean, they already caved into the pressure of the tariffs that Trump had put forth within 2 days. So I think if anything is going to happen that makes any sort of significant change into the future, now's the time.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland, Narcosis, and Ironclad Original. Our next guest is Ed Calderon. You guys know him. He was on the show before. He shows up and tells us what he thinks about the designation of the cartel being a terrorist organization. Check it out. Nice to have you back.
Thank you for the invitation, brother.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I can just host a show with conversations of the same kind of 5-6 guys that are friends of mine, and I just love to hear. And you're one of the top guys on my list that I've been waiting to talk to. I hadn't texted you directly yet because I'm going to save it for the show because I know we wanted you on. Mexico and America are going through it right now, dude. And I want to go off just a couple immediate questions. In your last interview, you talked about the biggest cartel in the Mexican government is the government. You know what I mean? And so just recently, President Claudia Sheinbaum has, approved 10,000 soldiers to the border in response to the Trump's tariffs. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, I made those comments, and I've been making those comments since I worked for the government, so I know from the inside what is going on. For people that don't know my background, I worked at a very high level back in the early 2000s at the start of this whole drug war nonsense that is still kind of engulfing the country. What I think is going on is at some point during the arrest and processing of Mayo Zambada, the historical leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, which is pretty much on the way out as far as the cartel goes, he probably gave them a laundry list of people that he'd worked with, paid off, collaborated with, installed into positions of power across the country for decades. So when Trump issued that warning about tariffs and about the government itself in Mexico being infiltrated, he has all the receipts. He has the receipt, I think. I'm pretty sure that the previous president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has a lot of donations made by his specific cartel, and I think that's where some of this wording comes from. That warning before the tariffs went into effect. Now we have a new president who's scrambling to basically clean up house. Who has said, "Yeah, we're going to give you 10,000." National Guard agents on the border. Well, there's a trick to that, and Americans should pay attention to this. They're already on the border. I mean, there's over 2,500 according to my guesstimation, and also the fact that I have people working in Guardia Nacional as friends of mine. There's already 2,000 of them in Baja, for example, and they're spread out across the border. So those numbers mean nothing. I mean, they're already there, and they have been there for the past 2 years. And we're living through some of the most violent times to be a Mexican in those border towns. I mean, the murders are going up. They're an open joke to most of the people that live in some of these border cities because they just troll around in the trucks, harassing people to look at to search them without any probable cause. And the murders keep going, and the drugs keep flowing, and the people keep flowing across that border. It is an interesting turn of events that they decided to put a pause on it. I think the Americans should pay really close attention and do an audit of what actually changes on that border. Are drug prices lowering, getting higher or lowering? I don't know. We should kind of look into that. I know for a fact people are still getting across. It's more expensive now, but people are still getting across. And you have to realize that border wall and the reinforced border we have now with the presence of the military in some parts of that border doesn't really do anything for tunnels that are still active. Doesn't really do anything for other means of insertion, maritime insertion, that these people are still, managing to put things through. And I guess on a final note, I think we've heard this before. This has happened before. We've been here before. Trump has been in power. Trump has used tariffs to leverage the Mexican government to secure its own borders. And after that happened, he left office, and then we saw the largest surge of migrants across that border in the history of the United States, with the Biden administration, when everything basically reverted back to zero. So I think it's promising, and I understand that he's trying to do a negotiation and pressure, but these 10,000 troops on that border are, in my point of view, meaningless.
Yeah, you think that's just I guess words to kind of please, almost like a public affairs statement that kind of pleases the audience, if you will. Because personally, I agree that I've seen the National Guard deployed across the border already, in significant numbers. So if I'm in one border and I see probably 15, 20 to 30 of them, well, then I imagine across the nation, 10,000 wouldn't be impossible. That's already kind of deployed. So that number is just like not necessarily a false narrative, but more of a pleasing number to say publicly. The other thing is, when you mentioned how much it costs to come across now, I've heard in your basic level crosser was $15,000 now per person at this time. I'm sure there's a white glove service that's way more expensive than that. That's a guarantee. But those who just come across the border hoping to gain access into America, currently the cost is $15K is what I've been told.
Yeah, it's either flying north, it's either renting a passport and a documentation that looks like you, or access through some of the more VIP ways of going across underground. That's what I've been hearing from various people that are, if people are dubious about what I'm saying, and I know TikTok wasn't banned, a bunch of these human smugglers are on TikTok, and they will get their clients doing testimonials on the U.S. side of like, hey, El Flaco just crossed me. He trusts him. He's a good guy. And they're in the U.S. And this is like recent, right? So it's still happening. It's not happening at the volume that it did before. I am going to say, and it's harder, or it seems to have the perception of being harder. That's why they're raising prices. Although some of the conversations that I've had with my contacts seem to tell me that they're just doing business as usual. They're just charging more because of the apparent difficulty of crossing, but they're still doing their thing as they normally do.
Wow, man, that's shocking. I know the numbers have dropped significantly since the Trump administration has taken office. And that's just in the areas that, are being detected and counted, right? There's obviously the border's porous, right? There's other ways of entering than just by walking or wading across the river. So I imagine your contacts are talking about things that could be tunnels, could be flights, could be many other means of entry into America.
Yeah, in person. I'm sorry, English is still my second language, although I speak it clearly. Identity theft is one of the big ones. Having a lookalike that has the same paperwork and you get rented out. Flights to Canada. A bunch of weird loopholes that people are kind of figuring out. And also and again, the volume is down, but people are still crossing is what I'm going to say. And drugs are still crossing as well. Again, a lot of the avenues into the United States for these substances have been in active use for longer than I worked. I got to find some of these tunnels, and they're pretty hard to find. even with some of the investment in equipment and training and all the U.S. Efforts to try and figure out where some of these tunnels are, they usually get found because of people getting stupid. But they're there. They're active.
They just found one in El Paso. Did you see that one?
Yep.
It was tall enough for a human to walk through.
Yeah, I've heard rumors and I've seen videos of some big enough to drive a truck through.
Holy smokes!
So I have no idea. I have no clue if these are legitimate or not. But why would, the flow is still going. Some of these organizations are still paying their people because there's no way you can, maintain a structure like that without being able to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I think if anything, the Sinaloa Cartel is the only one that I've seen basically disintegrating. But there's many other organizations out there that are still working on that border and still pushing the substances through.
Have you talked to any of your contacts recently about how they felt about being designated, a terrorist organization? Have you got wind of any of that yet?
Yes. So for context, I have trained and have friends that are still active across the field, both in special operations in Mexico, also on the newly formed intelligence service with the federal police, and Guardia Nacional, and just state and local police officers across that border and all over Mexico. And that's where I get a lot of my information. I've also just talked to people. I travel to Mexico regularly. I'm actually on my way to a pretty big event down in Mexico. What I've heard, the rhetoric that I hear from everybody is, number one, that designation has threatened the government more than it has threatened any cartel members. That is who is in fear of this designation, right?
Why is that?
Well, because a lot of these people that are currently in power had and have a lot of money behind them and backing behind them of institutions, companies, money men, middlemen who are cartel affiliated and funded. So they're aware that any sort of funding and support of that nature is going to come back and bite them in the ass. So they're afraid of the past. They're also very much aware that you as a country have a walking encyclopedia of who is corrupt and who isn't in the form of El Mayo Zambada. The going rhetoric within government circles is that we've already seen the first covert military operation by the United States in Mexico. And that was the arrest of El Mayo Zambada.
Really?
That is kind of the narrative in some of these circles, that this has already happened, that there's already been an intervention in Mexico. And if it was, I'm not saying it was or wasn't, but if it was, it was a pretty strategic and pretty devastating one for the Sinaloa Cartel, which historically has been the one that supported the current administration the most. So it's a conundrum for them. They're trying to figure out what is actually going on. The Sinaloa Cartel is disintegrating. They're at war with each other right now, and a lot of those blows have been dealt by El Mayo Zambada's arrest and the division it created within the historical federation of cartels that conform this area. And if you want another example of why the Guardia Nacional on that border doesn't mean shit, they're all over Sinaloa right now, and there's murders everywhere. So it's meaningless to have all these guys on those trucks moving around. You have a weakened cartel, and also you have now an adoption of new methodologies. Yesterday, there was a bunch of chatter about this U.S. spy plane flying over the Gulf of California. People are dumping communications and changing ways of communicating. People are researching what the people interacted when the U.S. went over there to invade. So people are actively trying to figure out how to get around the U.S.'s ability to listen. So what I see is cartel forces and criminal groups, basically adapting and shifting their footprint. You don't see a lot of online posting anymore. Communications have shifted, and people are going underground and kind of in a wait and see pattern. And the whole notion of these large criminal organizations with these figureheads at the top is, I think, it's going away. I mean, because some of these guys are basically going underground. But the drug is still flowing. There's still parts of Mexico where the government can't go. There's still parts of Mexico where the cartels are the ones that are in charge. And if people doubt that, then go to Michoacan. We just saw a coordinated drone attack.
I was going to ask.
A coordinated drone attack to a military convoy, and they hit a brigadier general in that convoy. People that are saying, and like, this is the narrative in Mexico. We're doing our jobs now. We're going after these criminal organizations. Don't worry about it, U.S. We got it. And then, we're still living through a basically active war zone in a lot of ways, in lots of parts of Mexico, and the violence is still happening. People are still disappearing. It's a mess.
Was there an explanation as to why that drone mission was even relevant for them? What was the purpose for them?
It's a weird one. It's odd. It's odd in many ways because there's little to no kind of information as far as why they would choose to upload videos and pictures of that attack. I have some pictures of the injured soldiers that I got from one of my contacts, and it is basically open warfare. Whatever agreements that the government had with some of these criminal organizations, I think probably got shit canned after the U.S. started putting pressure on the government and touted that designation in front of them. I think they're scrambling to try and either suppress, kill, or bury whatever connections some of these government organizations had with them, and that leads to a military convoy with a brigadier general being bombarded with drones by some of these criminal organizations.
Yeah, that was wild, man. When I saw that, we've heard that the CJNG has a drone, I guess, platoon or battalion, whatever it's called. And they're getting very, very skilled in how they use those. I know they're using a lot of the information they see from the Ukraine-Russian kind of conflict. And so they're building their skill sets. And I was very curious to see what level are they currently at this moment until I saw that video yesterday as well. And I was like, wow, it's pretty interesting to see that they're publicizing that as well. Maybe it's a psyop, right? Maybe they're just trying to show the world their capabilities, maybe intimidation, but just knowing that they have that capability is an interesting one to me. Recently in the news, there was an article put out from information or intel that was gathered by, it looks like it was CBP who first did it, that the cartels have greenlit, United States greenlit the use of drone explosives on the U.S. soldiers and Border Patrol agents. Is this something that you heard recently at all?
Yeah, it's bullshit. That doesn't work that way. It's not a single organization on that border, and they don't issue green lights. That whole aspect of it is kind of dubious. I think what is probably going on is that they are aware that drones are a threat, and that a drone can be flown over that border and drop explosive devices on them, and they're trying to keep their agents safe. I think is something that's happening. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of things that are being said that are kind of scary, but the cartels don't work that way. The cartels don't want to go over the border and kick a beehive of that nature. At least the historically large cartels that are in control of that region wouldn't do something like that. Although a lot of the figureheads behind some of these organizations have been arrested and killed, and now you have a younger generation that don't have the same blocks in their modus operandi that might do something like that. But from what I've heard, that there's no such issuing orders with the cartels as far as green lights of utilizing drones to attack Border Patrol agents. I haven't heard anything of that nature. And when I commented about that to certain people, they kind of laughed it off. They said we wouldn't kick a beehive, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Again, I think people should pay attention to the other side of this equation, because we have a tendency, and I say we because I pay taxes in the U.S. and I'm a part of this experiment now. We have a tendency to look at things one-sidedly. And I know that the U.S. is doing a lot of misinformation and disinformation as well. And I know that Trump has a lot of people in power that are doing their best job at, keeping us safe, but also keeping both sides guessing as far as what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's people just need to be conscientious and aware that both sides are playing a pretty complex game of geopolitics right now.
We've been getting a lot more followers on the page. Obviously, the topic that we're focusing on is cartels and drugs, and it seems to bring in a lot of people. On the new season of Borderland, Narcosis, we'll take an even closer look at the institutions, criminal forces, drugs, and operations that are driving mass migration from regions torn apart by violence and corruption. We're pulling back the curtain on the ruthless forces that drive mass migration. Organized crime. Would you be able to kind of give us kind of an overview of how many actual cartels might there be? I think some people don't realize that when you say there's a green light from the cartel, it's not one cartel like you mentioned. It's many. So there probably will never be a blanket statement across the board by all cartels. It would be more focused towards regions. But maybe you could kind of clarify that a little bit more.
Yeah, it depends on the day. Realistically, I mean, the Sinaloa Cartel used to be one big federation, conformed of several different factions. Now it's many. Now they're basically disintegrating as an organization, and a lot of the people that used to work with them are now working independently. And it could be anything from a group of 50 people to 20 to thousands. It's a hard number to put on. As far as how many organizations that are out there, because a lot of them don't name themselves or do a video with all of them masked up with rifles, telling that they're going to go kill the other cartels. A lot of them don't have names. They're just a group and organization of people who are discreetly distributing and putting people and drugs across that border, or running guns and bullets down to feed some of the wars that are going on down there. Also, a lot of them have shifted interest and shifted the ways they do things, and they've gone into legitimate business. So would you call a group of people that owned pharmaceutical companies in Mexico and basically skimmed on the product cartels? I don't know. I would, but they're not going to go and shoot anybody or try and do any sort of cross-borders smuggling. So it's a complex question. I think some big ones to look out for right now are the Cartel del Noroeste, that is very much active on the eastern side of the border. The New Generation Cartel and the remnants of the Tijuana Cartel, or the Los Arellano Felix Cartel, which they're still there in a way. They're just not a giant group. They're just very much connected in many ways and at many levels, and allied themselves with the New Generation Cartel right on the busiest border crossing on the planet, which is Tijuana. The Sinaloa Cartel's remnants are also still active and have a hold in different parts of the at the border, and also just the myriad of small groups in Sonora and Coahuila and other parts of the northern border that are basically small. They're big enough to be a threat, but they're small enough to not really be on the radar of most American people that watch the news or try and keep track of a lot of this. It's ever changing, but right now with the arrest of Mayo Zambada, a lot of things have changed. There's a lot of movement, and again, we look to the Mexican government as this institution that is going to do something about all these things, and has stated many times that it's going after these cartels as far as this current administration. And they just let go of El Mencho, the guy who originated the New Generation Cartel. They just let go of his wife. They just released her from prison. Now, why is that now? Why are they doing that right now? It's It's a complex environment. There's a lot of cartels, and I guess what I'm going to say is that the biggest one is the Mexican military and the Mexican federal government. That's the biggest cartel out there right now.
Yeah, I've heard stories of some of the migrants that are coming across through Mexico are more afraid of the National Guard than they are us in the American side, law enforcement, because the National Guard is doing some of the, not all of them obviously, but there is a few of them who are just robbing them as well, or is there stories of rape as well, and just knowing that the National Guard has those characters in it as well, just kind of raises the question, like, what are they actually doing on those borders? What are they supposed to be doing? And even with them there on the borders, there's still active people coming across all the time.
If anybody has any doubt about this, just go to a place like go to Tijuana and ask the locals what they think about the National Guard and what they're doing for the city. Yeah. They hate them. They roadside robbery. Yes, there's a lot of bad blood in that organization. Also, they're basically members of the army. They're just they just get different uniforms. The people in the U.S. might not know this, but that National Guard isn't the police. It's not the federal police of the past. They are basically a militarized wing of police, a national police that the government has now made. They changed the Constitution to allow this. They ran on a platform of demilitarization because they hated everything that Felipe Calderon did. The administration that I worked under for a bit. And they're basically replicating exactly the same thing. They militarized everything, which, again, not all members of the Mexican military are corrupt. I know some quality people in special operations. I know some quality people throughout that institution, but there are elements of it that are very much in cahoots with whatever is happening out there as far as organized crime. And if people doubt that, and they can look up the Mexican version of WikiLeaks, which is the Guacamaya leaks. And in that, it's all government Sedena documentation directly from the Mexican army, where they state, well, in this area, military region, we favor this cartel. In this region over here, we favor that one. This governor here favors this cartel, so let's not mess with him. Let's go over here. So it's an open secret. People can doubt everything they want, but the information is out there if people want to look for it.
So I have a couple questions about the Mexican side. What are their thoughts? Maybe people you've talked to, your friends, contacts, family. What are their thoughts about Trump becoming president?
Fear, mostly. Fear. A lot of them are fearful. The straight rhetoric they hear from the U.S. side, and a lot of the stuff that is being blasted on social media. Again, people really need to look closely at TikTok, and it probably should be banned, but that's just me saying that. There's a lot of propaganda on TikTok, on the Mexican TikTok, which is pretty fascinating because I get to experience the U.S. form of it and the Mexican form of it because I travel a lot. And the amount of anti-Trump and Trump is, basic, and also the anti-immigrant or anti-Mexican rhetoric on Mexican TikTok is insane. It's a lot of it. So I understand why they would be fearful. Some people are hopeful, but that's not a majority of Mexicans. They're hopeful that the pressure he's going to put on the government is going to actually change things. There's a veil across people's faces right now because people need to realize that Mexico currently is basically one single party ruling all. And that single party touts itself as being different than the past parties. They're Morena. They're the transformation of Mexico and all of this. Although we just lived through the most violent time to be a Mexican in this past administration, but that's beside the point. But it's conformed by people from the previous corrupt parties that I used to work for, from the PAN to the PRI to all of these political parties are now switching flags and joining this Morena party. So it's nonsensical to think that they're any different or that they're touting some sort of change or profound or some sort of profound anti-corruption thing, because corruption is all over the place, and I just it hasn't changed at all since I was active down there. A lot of people are fearful. Some people are hopeful that this administration is actually going to change things and pressure the government to change aspects that would make things safer. But you have to realize that from the Mexican perspective, they're fearful. One, the dollar just reached 21, almost 22 pesos per dollar, which is pretty. Basically, the peso's taking a dive with the threat of tariffs. And also, there's a bunch of border towns where it's a symbiotic relationship between Mexico and the United States. And, people are fearful that their documentation is going to be taken away, or their visas are going to be canceled, or their passports are going to be ripped apart by Border Patrol agents with this new kind of feeling of anti-Mexican or emboldenment to be able to work against some of the Mexicans crossing that border. It's fear. And some of it is founded because I've seen some emboldened Americans with authority basically harassing legal immigrants. I am a legal immigrant. I have been harassed. So I understand where that sentiment comes from. But also it's just the fear of losing their ability to cross that border legally. Again, people have to realize that people have families on both sides of the border. People from San Diego come and spend Christmas in Tijuana, and people from Tijuana will go and do their Christmas shopping in the United States. It is a symbiotic relationship, and that's being disturbed right now with this current hostility, because it is an open hostility in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the administration talks about the ICE raids are targeted focused raids on individuals who have come in the country illegally but have also committed a crime. But that has caused a big buzz on the media, and it turns into a lot of fear mongering, but as well as unsettling for some. Does that mean, what if I'm there? What if this, what if that? And that has caused a big buzz across the nation right now, that I understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Someone who has legal residency or legal permitted into the country for whether it's work, whether it's a visa, whatever that might be, they're in fear that someone might not know how to interpret that the right way, and they too get kind of balled up into the whole situation, right?
Yeah, and there's bad elements everywhere. Again, I've met some amazing Border Patrol people. I've trained some BORTAC agents. I've worked with ICE in different ways and forms. But I've also been harassed like a motherfucker when I crossed that border by some of them, and I've been treated like shit by some of them as well. So I understand where some of that comes from, and all it takes is one dude with an open phone recording something and having a single representative of that institution now being blasted all over Mexican social media. And all of you are the devil now, and I understand that function that has, and how that kind of warps opinions.
Let's talk strategies.
Sure.
Do you really believe there's ever a time where American U.S. soldiers, Tier 1 elements, will potentially maybe have some kind of mission in the Mexican territory?
Don't quote me on this, because I don't know, if I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure that's already happened. I'm pretty sure that that's already happened, at least in my time. I'm pretty sure that happened already. I think what we're talking about now is something that is going to be more overt. I think covert, but overt. I think the assassination of Soleimani in Iraq. I think that is what we're expecting. A high-level cartel head being cut to pieces by a Ginsu knife missile. I mean, that's the level of action I think the U.S. the government, the Trump administration probably will maybe do. I could see that. Mexico is not the Middle East. There's a lot of Americans living in Mexico, and I think that's a factor that should be factored into all of the discussion we have as far as implementing the military in Mexico, because you want to talk about hostage taking. That could happen rapidly in a mass and with mass amounts in Mexico, because there's many communities out there with expats living in Mexico. And I'm not trying to fearmonger anybody, but we have to be realistic. If something happens, we just saw the arrest of the second in command of the Northwest, el Cartel de Noroeste, group that's right on the border. When something like that happens, buses get burned, their blockades get issued, and government forces of all kinds get targeted. What's going to happen when we see one of those stealth helicopters fly off with the head of the Sinaloa Cartel, head of the New Generation Cartel? I don't know what is going to be their reaction. What is going to be their vengeance?
Yeah.
Who they're going to target? I don't know. It is complex. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe Trump will issue an order and have one of those Predator drones fly over Michoacan and blow up a cartel party somewhere and just eliminate leadership, and nothing will happen. But it's complex. It's complex, and again, if people are in the mind, Americans are in the mindset that this is happening down there. We don't want this over here. And a couple of months ago, the son-in-law of the New Generation Cartel got arrested in Riverside, California, out of all places. He faked his own death, and he was living comfortably in Riverside, California, in the business. So people are fooling themselves if they think this is an issue that is just on the Mexican side. A common narrative that is being pushed out by the Mexican federal government is this: the U.S. is very excited to come into Mexico to solve its cartel issues and its drug issues, but it does nothing in its own borders. When's the last time you've heard about a major drug kingpin being arrested in the United States? And there's crickets. When's the last time you heard about a major distribution network that goes across the country being dismantled? And I mean, they in a way they have a point. There are issues and parts of this problem that are very much tied to the United States, and people in cartels have been having kids in the United States, and some of these people have never even been to Sinaloa, and they are cartel affiliated, and they live and work and grow in the United States, and they are seemingly untouched. So that is the going narrative that the federal government in Mexico is pushing out. Like, you have your own issues to deal with. Why are you trying to come down here?
I agree. I agree that we're also the ones who create the demand. I have a question. I'm not sure if you could answer this, but someone hit me up with this on one of my inboxes. It says, what's the difference between cartel and gangs? In America, we call them gangs, but some of them are associated with cartel. What is the difference between the two? Or is it just in Mexico, we call them cartels. In America, we call them gangs, and they're synonymous. They do the same thing.
I'd say the definition, the Mexican definition of a cartel, I mean, they govern their territory. They act very much as a shadow government. They police their territory. They have an armed wing. They have their hands in multiple levels of financials, as far as like putting the illicit money into like private institutions to basically grow their monies. That's not, gangs don't do that type of shit. People want to compare them to the mafia. They're not the mafia. They're very different. The mafia, or the organized crime organizations in the past, the Italian kind, had limitations and stopgaps as far as how they would grow. I mean, they wouldn't let anybody in who was an Italian origin or something like that. Cartels don't have any issues with that. They'll let American citizens join them. The example of La Barbie, the cartel member who was born in Texas, and he was a high level cartel guy. Women have been in charge of organizations. I mean, they're their own thing. I don't see gangs in the U.S. achieve a transnational level as some of these criminal organizations. So I think, this designation, as far as them being a terrorist organization, I think is fitting, and it's something that I've been saying for years. I was called crazy when I said that on Joe Rogan for the first time when I was on there, and here we are. I had a lot of training from Americans when I was active, and a lot of them were coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And I would hear the stories of how some of the organizations that later morphed into ISIS would do their, how they would grow and how they would basically terrorize people. And I was like, yeah, it looks like they've been looking it looks like they've been looking at a lot of cartel videos, because that's what inspired some of those torture and murder videos that ISIS did. Yep. So they're very much that, but it leads us in, but it's a different animal though, because, okay, these cartels are terrorist institutions. Then all of the gun stores on the border in Arizona, for example, that have been allowing straw sales of firearms to individuals that then get trafficked down to Mexico. Now all of them are sponsoring terrorism. Are we ready to label them as terrorist sponsors? I don't know. It's very complex. Are we ready to go after MTV for allowing a cartel sponsored artist like Peso Pluma on their show to sing, or Jimmy Fallon? Jimmy Fallon is now a sponsor of terrorism. If we
yeah, because he's an accomplice because he allowed that individual, right? Is that what we're saying?
If Jay Leno had Osama bin Laden on to spread out his message while he was being hunted out there, would we go after Jay Leno? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely does.
It's a complex issue. Are we going after Netflix for some of these El Chapo shows? It's complex, and I understand why the Mexican government has been very successful in the narrative that it's being put forth about how nonsensical this designation is. Although I agree with it, but it is complex, and I think on my end, I would say that Americans need to keep a close eye on how the government reacts, the Mexican government reacts, and if it follows through with what they're saying they will. These 10,000 people, these 10,000 agents on the border, it's meaningless. They've done this before. We've been here before. This has happened before. This is right. The first Trump administration. We've been here before. The only thing that's different now is that there's a terrorist designation forward. I hope people are keeping track of this, and I hope people are actually going to ask for results and a true change, which I don't foresee happening. I'm witnessing it firsthand, and I'm about to go down to Mexico for a bit, and talk to some of the people that I'm connected with down there. And all I've seen is basically people dumping their usual forms of communication on the criminal side, adapting and shifting, standing orders to not have any social media, anything. So that's another thing, to not do interviews. Thank you, Sean Penn. And to basically adopt a more clandestine operational stance reminiscent of Al Qaeda. I think what we're going to see is an evolution of some of these criminal organizations when they shift to a more underground type setting. And I mean, they're already shopping around for communication devices. They're already researching how they adapted in places like Afghanistan and Iraq to the U.S. Military arm. And we're already seeing U.S. spy planes basically flying near the coast of Sinaloa, picking up all these signals, and they're aware of this. It's no secret to them. These criminal organizations should not be You shouldn't underestimate these people. Is all I'm going to say. But I don't know. I'm hopeful that this time it's, this time around Trump will actually, hold fast and pressure for actual change, because it's needed. And I travel across the U.S. and I still have images. I'm from Tijuana, like I was born there. and then going to places like Portland and uh, and it's weird. It's surreal that I literally had to leave for safety reasons, and then I encounter like a worse setting in the country that I'm going to, and it is being very much fed by heroin that is being grown in a hillside somewhere in Michoacan, and it's being put into needles that the government itself is issuing to the users, and they're littering the ground, and I have to keep my 10-year-old in my arms so she doesn't step on any of that. How fucking mind-blowing is that?
And do you think at any point soon we'll be watching the U.S. forces, Tier 1, Tier 2, whatever that is, executing any kind of raids in a fashion that we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan?
It's difficult. There's pressure on both sides, and Mexico does have teeth, economic teeth. Mexico is the largest one of the largest trading partner with the United States, so I could see how it could pressure in that way. But realistically, I don't think they have the will or the ability to do anything about it. If the United States decides to do a direct action mission in Mexico, which I'm pretty sure that's already happened a few times. There's when I was active, there was all these rumors of these really tall dudes wearing federal police uniforms somewhere. But I think it's a very big possibility, either that or some sort of direct drone strike reminiscent of the Soleimani assassination. The amount of things that could be done are vast. I mean, if I had any sort of say in this, I'd say realizing that a lot of these criminal heads are probably in different parts of Central and South America right now, hiding out realistically, if they are still alive. We've seen in the past organizations like the Sinaloa Cartel and El Chapo Guzman flying to the Caribbean, and his son basically posting a video of it and calling him out on it when he was still running around playing hide and seek with the government. So don't be surprised that some of these direct action missions are going to be happening in other parts of the world, in other parts of Central America and South America. Probably, it's very possible if the U.S. is actually really targeting and really trying to hunt these people down. Or a drone strike, a direct action drone strike somewhere in Mexico is also a pretty big possibility in my opinion. What is the Mexican government's reaction to this? What can it be other than being really angry about it and doing a bunch of press conferences? Again, if people want to gauge the reaction of the Mexican government to this, they should gauge the reaction to the arrest of Mayo Zambada. Mayo Zambada, the historical head of the Sinaloa Cartel, was kidnapped after a meeting that he was set up by the son of El Chapo Guzman to try and negotiate some sort of truce between two political figures of some sort in Sinaloa. And then he was put on a plane and flown over the border. And everybody that witnessed
to an airfield that I'm very familiar with personally.
And all witnesses were killed. Right. So I don't know too much about the details of exactly how they put him on that plane and everything like that, but it seems very reminiscent of, this pretty high level covert operation by the United States. And that's what it seems like to most people in the government in Mexico. So if you want to have a measuring stick as far as what the reaction of Mexico would be to something of that nature, we've already seen it, I think, with that.
Yeah, there was almost no movement.
There was indignation. Nothing. It was like you're responsible for all the violence in Sinaloa that has stemmed from this war that has now broken out between the factions, blaming each other as far as who was responsible for this arrest of this again, historical criminal figure in Mexico. And the government's only response was to accuse El Chapo Guzman's son of treason. Think about that. That was the reaction of the federal government to somebody handing over the most powerful and influential cartel head in Mexican history to the United States, was to accuse him of treason. So I think that should tell you everything you need to know about the current federal government, and also about its possible reaction to an actual direct action mission in Mexico. Yeah, there will be a lot of indignation. There will be a lot of noise and sound but I don't think they can do anything about it. I mean, they already caved into the pressure of the tariffs that Trump had put forth within 2 days. So I think if anything is going to happen that makes any sort of significant change into the future, now's the time.
Yeah, the last question I have, in politics in Mexico, especially this recent election, there was some of the most assassinations due to, the cartel or whoever it was kind of making sure the people that they wanted were going to be in power. Is that indicative of saying that Claudia Sheinbaum is definitely connected in some capacity for the fact that she's still, kind of the figurehead and voice, or assassinating someone like her would cause way too much issues in Mexico?
All of those assassinations were basically one cartel having a political candidate and the other one having a different one. So I don't want your candidate to win, so I'm going to kill him. That's exactly what's happening in Mexico.
Yeah.
I don't think there is any doubt in my mind that the previous president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, although he is highly beloved in Mexico, and I get a lot of shit for speaking this, was connected and sponsored. This political campaign was sponsored by elements of the Sinaloa Cartel. And if people deny that, why did we have a president visiting the hometown of El Chapo Guzman 6 times in his presidency? I mean, what is so important about that specific town? We have him on video talking to El Chapo Guzman's lawyer. We have him petitioning the United States government to release El Chapo Guzman back into Mexican custody that he escaped twice, and we also have him soliciting the U.S. government to give back a high-level general in the form of Cienfuegos, who had a bunch of charges on him for organized crime and association, that he was arrested in the United States, and he pressured the U.S. government in some way to get him back. So if anybody doubts that he's sort of like shadiness going on there, just look into these things that I just put forth. Now, Sheinbaum is new into the game in a lot of ways. When I say new, I mean I haven't figured out exactly what her angle is. Her political campaign was definitely sponsored by criminal organizations, specifically of the Sinaloa kind. And there's definitely some sort of favoritism that was happening there. But it's not as clear. I think I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. issues some sort of arrest warrant or some sort of indictment against the former president of Mexico. Not the current one, but at least one or a few of the former presidents of Mexico is probably going to go down. There's a reason why most of them live in Spain. Most of the former presidents of Mexico are hiding out in Spain, except the last one. The last one basically built a compound near a military barracks, and that's where he lives.
Interesting stuff, man. I really appreciate your expertise and just your willingness to come onto the show again. If you don't mind, tell the audience where they can find you, where they can reach out to you, everything else you have going on.
Edsmanifesto.com and Manifesto Radio Podcast on Instagram. I'm around. I have an opinion. I speak from the heart. I have no political allegiances. I didn't like the past 2 candidates of the presidency in the United States. I am very much pro-gun. I'm pro-America. I'm pro-Mexico. And I think there is no future without both countries coming together. there's just no way we're going to be able to figure out the future without us figuring out something together. And I'm trying to bridge the gap.
Ironclad creates premium content no matter the environment. From extreme elements to unforgiving terrain, we thrive on crafting content that captures the essence of your brand in the most challenging conditions. Bring your brand story to life, ensuring your message leaves an impact. Ready to elevate your vision? Connect with us today at ironcladagency.com.